World Teach presentation.
You forgot the time.
There was a party for the new regional director.
The new regional director's wife expected him for supper.
Nico, this is what we wanted.
No. No, this is what you wanted, Henry.
You benefit as well.
I get to cook more suppers no one eats.
You know sacrifice must be made to get ahead, you know that.
But we are already ahead. We have beautiful children, a beautiful house. We have beautiful things. I see them all the time, but I never see you.
These are my peak earning years, Nico.
Uh-huh. And also your peak husbanding years, and your peak fathering years, Henry.
Who do you think I'm doing this for? So you can live where you like, how you like, so the children can go to the school you want them to go to.
You never see them. They wake you up on their way to school and say bonjour and au revoir. And by the time you get home, they're already in bed.
So what can I do? I can either see them and not provide for them, or provide for them and not see them. What am I supposed to do?
What does God want from us? It's a simple question, but not a simple answer. If it's true that for everything gained, something is lost, how do we find balance in our lives?
The 7 stages of spiritual growth. With your guide, Dr. Bruce Wilkinson. Consecration, Part 1.
Welcome to the 7 stages of spiritual growth. Of all the 7 stages, I believe this one is the single most important of all 7 for the great majority of everyone who will watch this series. It is stage 2, the stage of consecration. When you think about consecration, it's very similar to dedication. And in your notebook, I want you to take a look at the meaning of consecration because I have much to teach you in this session. Before this session is over, I want you to leave saying to yourself, oh, I really understand what consecration is and how it works. And then the next time we're together, we're going to deal with the practical side, your pilgrimage in consecration. And we'll give you the 5 milestones that everybody must pass through in your own pilgrimage of consecration. But when you try to understand it, what does it literally mean? Well, it's a lot like dedication, except in your notes, consecration is a voluntary dedication of your life to God. The difference between dedication and consecration is you can be dedicated to a job, to a vision in your mind, to a person, and consecration means I am dedicated to God. I am devoted to God. I am committed to God. And therefore, we want to deal with this question about how dedicated are you, most of the time, to God. How much of you have you given to Him? If you remember, the first 3 stages of the 7 stages are conversion, when you come to meet Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. Consecration is when you respond to what He has done, and as He gave Himself for you, you turn around and give yourself back to Him. Then stage 3 is called conduct, which is when God convicts us of various areas of our life which are displeasing to Him, and He asks us to change them. When He asks that, if you've not at least consecrated some of your life to Him, then you don't really have a basis to change your behavior. I don't want to do what you want me to do, and I've already said no when you've asked me to dedicate myself to you, so why should I do this? But the deeper that you have dedicated yourself to God, the more that you are interested, open to, and obedient to his request. Now, I want you to understand something about dedication. You ever said to somebody, boy, is she ever a dedicated person? Or maybe you saw a person win a gold Olympic medal, and you realized how much dedication it took in their social life and their physical life, and everything that they did and talked and thought about and dreamt about was all that one event at the Great Olympics. Are they more dedicated than you? I don't believe they are. I believe every single one of us are fully dedicated at every moment. It's just what you're dedicated to. That particular person was dedicated to seeking to achieve first place. Well, whatever you decide to do is what you are dedicated to do. If you decide to sit and watch a 3-hour television show and to do that on a regular basis, night after night, you are dedicated to personal enjoyment and entertainment. That's what you have decided to become dedicated to. You could at any moment stand up and say, I don't want to remain dedicated to entertainment for me. I want to dedicate myself to X. So it's not that some people have a lot more dedication. They do not. They have all their dedication. And you and I have all of it. You don't have 50% dedication. You have 100%. It's just whatever you are dedicated to. Now, of all the things that you and I could be dedicated to, this session deals with our dedication to a specific person, to God, to Jesus Christ, and how committed am I to him. When you think about consecration, consecration is something that is private. It's a commitment of your heart. When you're devoted, I am devoted to my wife. My wife is devoted to me. If you met Darlene today, you wouldn't know she was devoted. You couldn't see it in her eyes unless perhaps I was around or something was going on and you noticed it. But if you met her down at the shopping mall, you wouldn't have any way of knowing, is that person devoted to somebody else? You couldn't know. It's inside, isn't it? Therefore, as I look across all of your faces, I really can't tell which one of you is devoted to God a lot or middle or a little. When you really back away and get the big picture of where we're going in this session, ultimately, there's only dedication to yourself and what you want with people, places, things, goals. I want. Or it is, I'm devoted to you as a person and what you want. So if we took all of our dedication in this conversation and just put it right here, let's put 100 pennies stacked right here. And we set it right here. And there were 2 boxes. One box, I'm devoted to what I want, and I'm devoted to God. And the deal is take all the 100 pennies and put them somewhere. Where would you put them? Right this moment. Most people would keep most of the pennies. Going to church doesn't necessarily mean you're devoted, does it? You could do it because your parent told you, or because for you to keep a good standing in the community, you need to do it. And you could have an undevoted heart. Well, I want you now to move past the meaning of it and move into 3 important misconceptions about it. Number 1 misconception is that consecration occurs without struggle. The average person thinks consecration doesn't have struggle, that it must be easy for you, because it's not easy for me. And I would consecrate myself if it wasn't so hard. The misconception then is that consecration is easy to do. The truth of it is difficult to do. And that's why so few people do it. Therefore, if you are in your mind waiting for the day when the struggle's gone and it's easy for you to consecrate yourself to God, give it up. It won't happen. Now, whenever you ask a person, If I knew that Terry was struggling and only had a few pennies in consecration, and I was talking with him and he asked me to help him, if I eventually got to the point where I asked Terry the bottom line question, why don't you give yourself over to God? If we crawled inside of Terry's head, we'd find fears everywhere. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like, if I did, God would send me to where? How many say in Africa right here at this moment? In the United States, when you talk to a Christian, a person who's met Christ, about giving himself to God, it's a universal response, which is, if I really do that, he'll send me to Africa and I'll live in a hut. Now, I don't know where that idea came from. If you ask people in Africa to consecrate themselves to God, they say, oh no, God will send me to downtown New York City. You know what it is? It is the realization that right now, he can't send me because I'll say no. And if I really consecrate myself to him, he has every right to say, go over there. And therefore, it's fear. You talk to some other people about this concept, and they say, I remember talking to a group of men about this. They said, if I consecrated myself to God, I'd have to quit my job, and go be a minister and preach all the time. And of course, to that guy, that was the worst thought that there was. And I understand that. But see, I can't do that for me. I have to become somebody else, and then I can do it. But not me. That couldn't be further from the truth. Other people think, if I really turn my life over to God, he's going to ask me for every penny that I have. Everything. And he'll take away my house, my car, and I'll be penniless underneath the bridges. You ever thought that? Some of you thought that. You're nodding like crazy. You know what we do? We take the extremes every single time. The worst possible case, and say, since God could do that, there's no way I'm going to let him do that. By the way, if he wanted to take every cent you owned away, does he need your permission today? He doesn't need your permission today. But the question is, you haven't given him your permission. And that's what consecration is. It's when you and I give our permission. Number two, here's the second misconception, that consecration is a one-time experience. That if something can occur at a big service or a rally, or I was talking to a man in Israel once, he said, if there's a blinding light like the Apostle Paul did on the road, then I would consecrate. And I said, is that the only way you'll do it? He said, that's the only way you'll do it. He's believing it's a big event. Other people say, well, if I can just go to a meeting when such and such a person is there and these things happen, why, I am going to do it. As if it is, I'm not really consecrated, and now I'm consecrated. It just doesn't work that way. Well, what did happen? Well, you consecrated some. But the truth of it is, it's not a one-time event. For instance, if you have a little daughter and she's 9 years old, and God and her are really working along, and she says to you, Mommy, I want to give God my whole life tonight. I met Jesus last year at Bailey Vacation Bible School, but right now, I love him so much, I want to give him my whole life. Isn't that a wonderful moment, just thinking about that? Well, if you were to look inside the little girl's heart, that's 100% consecration. But when she gets older, and she gets about 18, and she's got to have a whole other struggle. And to think that everything that could have been done is done here isn't really true. It is that there are many different times that consecration happens. It happens here, it happens here, it happens here, it happens here. It keeps on happening. It's not one time. There really is, to be honest with you, as a grown person, usually one big crisis which occurs. But there are many different times, and there are many different levels. What do I mean by that? Oh, you could say, Lord, I consecrate, I dedicate to you 10% of what money I have. It's mine, I hereby give it to you. I consecrate it to you. You can consecrate a thing. You can consecrate a person, a place. And then somebody comes along and says, but I need some of this. No way. This is mine. This is yours. So this may be consecrated, but all this isn't. So there are different levels, aren't there? There's different times and there's different levels. And ultimately, consecration is meant to become something that happens all of the time. When you get up in the morning, before you get out of that bed, consciously consecrate yourself to Him. Number 3 is a deep misconception. This is the conception that has the thought that consecration is the same thing as conversion. That they take stage 2 and stage 1 and they dump them together. And that when you meet Jesus Christ, it means you have fully devoted yourself to Him. And if you haven't, then you've not truly been converted. The Bible teaches those are different things. Is it possible to accept the work of Jesus on the cross and what He did without me doing anything? Yes. That's the whole point. It's a gift He gives to me, and I receive it. Whether or not I decide to devote myself to Him more and more and more is really up to me. He invites me to do this, but He doesn't make me do it. So as I travel around the world, it's become real apparent that 3/4 of any audience has not even got early on to the stage of consecration. They have not. They've met Christ, but they've not responded back to Christ because of the fears that are there. And to be honest with you, it is most of the time that consecration takes a long time for people because it's not talked about. And it could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years after you accept Christ that you give yourself back to Him. And some people never do. So that's a major, complicated issue. Consecration is not required by God for salvation, and consecration radically influences one's conduct. Now, the third thing I want to deal with is the mindset for consecration. And it comes out a key verse. It is Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Let me read it to you. It says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Of all the verses, the thousands of verses in the Bible, this one is the clearest one about consecration. And it has 5 things I want you to see. The verse starts out and says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, that I want you to present yourself to God as a living sacrifice. That means I give myself to you. I beseech. It's an invitation, not I command. You can't command somebody to do this. This is of the heart. God says, I invite you to do this because of who I am and what I've done, but you don't have to if you don't want to. I invite you to do it. And I beseech you, therefore, brethren. He's talking to Christians in the book of Romans. Christians who are already born again, but have not become consecrated. They've not done it. And the church is over 10 years old. So there are believers in that church at least 10 years old who have not done this yet. That's why he's asking them to do it. So point number 1 is consecration is acceptable to God after you are born again. After. He's asking believers. If you ask a non-Christian, a person who's not met Christ, to devote themselves to God, what they're doing is sincere and genuine, but they're doing works to earn their salvation rather than because they are born again, they give themselves back to God. Point number 2. Consecration is an official act of voluntary presentation. It's something you do. It says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies. You remember when Jesus was little, Joseph and Mary brought the baby Jesus to the temple and presented Jesus. They actually made an official presentation of Jesus as a baby back to God. Presentation means I come of my own free will in an active, official moment, and I take myself, I hold myself, and I present myself. Lord, here I am. And the question is to a Christian, will you decide to do this the same way Joseph and Mary did to their children, to do it to yourself? If you've never done that, then you haven't done it. If you have, I guarantee you remember it, because it's a difficult thing to do at that particular moment. Number 3, consecration occurs when you release to God complete control. It says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies, here it is, a living sacrifice. It's a shocking thing. The picture in the Old Testament was a Jew would bring an animal to sacrifice it, and the sacrifice literally meant it died. But here, the picture is, you bring yourself, not another animal. You bring you, because you want to, and you bring yourself to God. Well, I don't know how else to say this. And you die to yourself. And yet you remain alive. So up till now, I've been alive to me. I've done what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. That's what I do. I'm mine. I'm alive to me. And God says, well, you can if you want to, but you can also decide to take you and die to you. Take your hands off, no ifs, ands, or buts. You are giving yourself to God. You're dead to yourself, but you're alive to Him. So if He said to you, you're right, believe it or not, I do want you to go to that hut in Africa or the downtown New York, then you would say, yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's complete control. 4th thing, consecration that is genuine is received by God. How? You may be sitting there saying to yourself, yeah, but if you knew what I've done in my life, you would never, God wouldn't want me because of what I've done. But this verse shows something absolutely wonderful. That you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. It's acceptable to God, which means if you ever come to the place in your life where you pick yourself up with all the stuff that's true about you and true about me, and you pick yourself up and say, God, I want to give myself to you. God's on the other side saying, I accept you. I accept you. It's acceptable. You don't have to fix something. You present it. And God says, I'll receive it because you're giving it to me. You remember that consecration precedes conduct. We think it goes this way. Whew, if I can just get my life together, then I'll give myself to God. And God's the opposite. Give yourself to me first, then we'll work on your life. That's why Romans 12:1 asks for your life, and the rest of Romans tells you what to do and obey. The last point is that consecration, I used to think that consecration was this big step, you know, wow, I hope I could do it. And this verse says the exact opposite. Exactly the opposite. It says this, consecration should be completely logical and reasonable to you. The verse says this, a living sacrifice holy, acceptable to God, comma, which is your reasonable service. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means if you do this, you ought to say to yourself, I want to do this. Here's the reason I want to do this. Nobody's making me. Although God may ask hard things of me, I want to go there. Why? It makes sense to me. How does it come to the point in which it makes sense? Because most people it doesn't make sense. That's why they don't do it. We skipped a phrase in that verse. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourself. Mercies of God, what is that? It's like Paul's saying, you're standing here at this line, and I want you to turn around. Because, you know, the verse starts, I beseech you, therefore. And he's saying, in the first part of my book of Romans 1 through 11, I told you of all the wonderful things God has done for you. Of how he sent his son to die for you, that he sent his spirit into you, of what he has planned for you, that he's working everything together for your good, and that he's wonderful and kind and merciful. And since he's that kind of God and has that done for you, and the Bible says, eye has not seen and ear hasn't heard what God has prepared ahead of time for those who love him, that you say to yourself, why would I ever say no to God? And a moment goes on, you say, I've been the most arrogant person possible, thinking I can run my life a lot better than God. And that I'll be much happier living here in Atlanta against the will of God than if God says, go move in the hut in Africa, because he said that's where I want you and that's where you will be so happy and fulfilled. So you know what it is? I don't trust you, I trust God. Why would a person not trust God? As we wrap this session up, you need to be asking yourself a very serious and important question. And that question is, do you honestly think you can control your life so it turns out better than God can do for you? As you look around in your life, would you say, you know, I've made really good decisions all along, and I'm really full of joy and happiness, and I know that I'm doing things that are so meaningful and important to God? Or when you fight this battle with God, when God's not really battling, God's inviting. You and I are doing the battling. And he says, it's really the truth. He says to you, if you just believed exactly the way I am and what I have done, you would run to me and say, please take me. I want to be your living sacrifice.